All right, guys, so we've got a bit of an interesting build today, and it's all focused around the Lian Li SL Infinity wireless 140mm fans because they came out with the 120mm version several months ago, and with enough demand from the community, they decided to release the 140mm version. So I was talking to Lian Li and I asked them what case they have that supports 140mm fans, and they recommended the Lian Li O11 Dynamic XL. And I've actually never built in this specific case, although I've done a lot of O11 dynamic builds. I've never done the XL, so we'll have to see how the build process is, and I know it's got a lot of interesting features. So massive shout out to Lian Li for providing the fans, the case, and also a massive shout out to Arctic for supplying their Liquid Freezer 3 Pro 420mm AIO, because obviously we'll need a radiator that supports 140mm fans. So Arctic decided to send out that one. So we've got a really cool looking build today. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at the case before we get into the build and then start talking about all the different components and everything that goes along with the build. So the O11 Dynamic XL has been out for quite some time, so I'm not gonna do a full case review, but we'll go ahead and take a quick look at it. We do have glass on both sides. We do have a very generous IO down here with 4 USB-A and a USB-C. And we've also got a combo audio jack, and then there is an RGB strip going right there. And then if we take a look at the back, it looks like we've got some ventilation for our side fans, then also ventilation over here for our power supply. And then taking a look at the rear, it looks pretty standard. We've got a vertical PSU mount. Motherboard's gonna sit right here. We can fit 2 120mm fans in the rear. Those are basically going to be the only 120mm fans in the case. And then we have all of our PCIe slots. So let's go ahead and take off the panels for this, take a look at the inside, and then I'm going to kind of plan out the build and see what works best. Okay, so I've got this thing down to the frame pretty much. And this is an interesting case because one, it does have this support bar right here that sits right there. So I ended up removing it because I want to be able to see all of my build, but when you do remove this, the top panel definitely does have some flex because there's obviously nothing supported right here. So I think you might want to be careful on what you mount on top, but at the same time, as soon as you put the front glass panel on, you get that rigidity that you need from the top. So without it, it is definitely a bit flexy, but I'm going to go ahead and still leave this off. I'm going to mount my AIO up here, mount the rad up here, and then once the front glass panel is back on, it should have all the support it needs. But this case has a ton of crazy features, especially with the motherboard tray. You can move it up and down in a bunch of different positions. So depending on your build, and if you're doing, say, a custom loop, you can pretty much go crazy with whatever radiators you want, and you'll have the clearance for the motherboard because you can position it in different spots. And then we're gonna have 3 140mm fans on the bottom, 3 140mm fans on the side. We're gonna have our 420mm AIO on the top, and then we're gonna have 2 120mm fans on the rear. And then taking a look at the back, this actually hides all the cable management. But once I opened it, I was like, wow, why is there so many cables? And then I realized that this has a hot swappable drive base. So we have a bunch of SATA power and data connectors, and there's a lot of cables in this case, which is going to make this a bit tougher to cable manage. So I guess we're going to have to see how the end result is, because if you guys have seen my channel before, you know cable management in the rear is one of my main priorities. So I guess we'll get further along in the build and see how it goes, but there is a ton of room back here. Our PSU is going to mount right there with the fan facing this way. So it should honestly be a pretty easy build. And the case has a ton of room, especially with this front glass panel off and the this little piece right here. We've got a ton of room to access our build, so building in this case should be really easy. So let's go ahead and get to assembling the motherboard, and then as we move along with the build, we'll start talking about the fans and anything else I find interesting during the build process. So let's go ahead and let's get into it. Okay, so the motherboard is installed and we have all of our front panel connectors connected right now. We have a 5-volt ARGB plug, and that's actually for the RGB strip on the case. We've got USB Type-C, we've got USB Type-A, we've got our front panel connector like our power button and reset button, and then we also have HD audio right here. And one thing I get questions about a lot is this bracket. So this is actually the sag bracket that I use. So what you do is you remove the 2 screws from the motherboard right there, and then you install these longer standoffs. So you can kind of see we have some long standoffs right there. So you get those 2 installed, then you install this bracket, then you can see we have this little shoulder right here. So that's actually going to support our GPU, and you can pretty much place this anywhere along this whole bracket, but it's very discreet. You can't see it once the GPU is in. It's very hidden. And then you don't need one of those pole style sag brackets, which I don't think visually look that good. And I can't remember the exact name, but it's made by Lian Li, so I'll go ahead and link that below. But I use it on so many builds. But so far the motherboard is looking great in there, and I think it's gonna match the build really well. And then taking a look at the back, we got some preliminary cable management done. Let me go ahead and move this so we can get some more light. So we got some preliminary cable management done. Like I've got these all zip tied right here and then down here. And you can see I like these brackets on these cases because you can see the cables are going behind here. And then all my PSU cables are actually going to go through right there. And I apologize, it's not focusing, but it's going to go through right there. So hopefully all of those cables are hidden. And then like I mentioned earlier, these are hot swappable drive bays. So there's a bunch of cables coming off them like SATA power and SATA data. So I actually just have those tucked into these drives because I'm not going to be using that. So I just have all these cables tucked. And then the same thing for the bottom. They're all tucked down here. And you can see we have a pretty clean look so far. So once the PSU cables are in, they should hopefully hide all of these front panel cables. So far it's looking good. And then at the end of the day, you do close this up and none of that's even seen anyways. And then on this case, I actually don't think you could remove this because on the O11 Vision Compact, you can completely remove this. Maybe there is a way, but I don't really need to. But anyways, this is going to cover any of it anyways if you're worried about how your cable management looks. But so far we're off to a great start, but let's go ahead and take a look at the fans and move on from there. Okay, so I've got all of the fans laid out exactly how I would have them laid out in the case. We've got 3 reverse blade fans on the bottom for intake. We've got 3 reverse blade fans on the side for intake. We've got 3 regular blade fans for exhaust on the radiator up top. And then these are actually 120 millimeter fans, but these are regular blade for exhaust in the rear. So we've got 6 intake with the bottom and the side. Then we've got 5 exhaust with the rear and the top. And one reason why I really like these fans, especially for a cable management nut, is the fans do daisy chain together. They kind of just slide together. So these are actually connected and there's only 1 cable coming off of them. And it's actually just a PWM cable. So there's only 1 PWM cable. So we have 4 total cables for all of these fans. And RGB and fan speed are wirelessly controlled. So they're not 100% wireless. Don't come after me for using the term wireless. That is how they marketed them. But they do need power, and that's basically what this PWM is for power. So you can plug these into your fan headers, but sometimes there's not enough power that your fan header gives off to power these fans, which will usually cause the fans to blink, meaning insufficient power. So what I like to do is when you buy the 3-pack, they come with this 3-split cable. So you can see there's a SATA cable right here, and these actually go to 3 PWM connections. So you're gonna go ahead and plug this end into a SATA plug that's coming from your power supply. And then you can plug 1 group into here of fans, 1 group of fans into here, another group into here, and then I have another one. So basically I'm gonna use 4 of these legs because we have 4 different groups. So none of the cables are actually going to show on the front side. So for cable management, these are by far the best fans that I've tried, and they're super easy to manage. We can basically just tuck them all behind the case, and then you use the controller that Lian Li gives you, and you just plug that into a USB port. Then you use their software, and then you can control fan speed and RGB. So a really well thought out system, and I've actually been using their fans for quite some time. Those are the white SL Infinity 120 millimeter versions, and I use them all the time. I absolutely love them. So really enjoy using these fans. I do always highly recommend them, but some people think they're overhyped, but that is however you want to feel about it. But let's go ahead and get these installed in the case, get these wired up to those 3 split cables, and then move on with the build. All right, so the build is all done and I think it looks fantastic. I've personally done quite a few builds in the O11, ranging from the O11 Vision Compact to the O11D Mini V2 and the V1, and then now the O11D XL, which is my first time building in this case. And I feel like it's a very mixed opinion when it comes to this case. It is extremely popular, this whole fish tank style case. And I feel like people absolutely love it or they feel it's overhyped. So let me know your opinion on this style case. If you like it, if you don't like it, if you're using something similar, let me know down in the comments. But this finished build ended up turning out really, really good. And we're gonna get some lighting in the way here, but here is how the finished build looked. I really wanted the fans to pop out, so I didn't use much RGB on like the central component region. I don't know what else to call it, but like the motherboard area, the GPU, the AIO, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible so the fans remain the main focus. So I think the build looks great and it is a really big and heavy build here, but this is the XL, so that's kind of a given. But let's go ahead and take off these panels and then let's talk about the inside, because I did make quite a few changes that I know I'm going to get comments on. Okay, so the first change I made is I'm actually only running a singular 120mm fan in the rear, because during the little fan section, during the build montage, I shut off 2 rear fans, but then I realized that the motherboard tray actually has to be in the lower position to fit 2 rear fans. So I didn't end up wanting to go that route, because in the position it's in, you can see we have a pretty large gap between the GPU and the bottom fans. Well, when the motherboard tray is in the lower position, the gap here is smaller, but then there's a bigger gap up top. So I thought this would look better, so I ended up just going this route and then using the standard orientation for the motherboard tray, which is basically how it ships out of the factory from Lian Li. So I kept it as is, but because it's as is, I'm only able to fit a singular 120mm fan in the rear. So that's one change I made. And then the second change I made is I'm actually using the non-RGB Arctic 420mm AIO. Like I said earlier, I kind of wanted this to be all blacked out and the fans to be the main focus of the build. So I went with the non-RGB version. So thank you to Arctic for sending out the ARGB version and also the non-RGB version, which kind of gave me flexibility on how I wanted to do this. So I think this looks really cool. It's just all blacked out and then the fans really pop. But the fans also do a good job at lighting up the rest of the build too. So I thought that looked cool. And I think the last change I made is during the montage, I showed I had a 5-volt ARGB plug hooked up right there, and that was for the case. So there's an RGB strip right there. Well, I reinstalled Windows on this SSD, and for some reason, the motherboard software with Gigabyte was not recognizing it. So I kind of went back and forth, and I could not get the RGB to change. So I ended up just unplugging that and then just leaving it basically just like this. So you can kind of see it, but it actually kind of matches with the build. You can see it's just kind of gray, and you can see we've got a lot of gray highlights. So I actually thought that looked kind of cool. So I ended up removing that 5-volt ARGB plug. But overall, I think the finished build turned out great. And as far as the build itself, we've got a AMD Ryzen 9700X. We've got 32 gigabytes of Corsair RAM. And then we've got a Gigabyte Aorus B850 motherboard. We've got a 1 terabyte SN750X, I believe. I may have to correct that. And then we've actually got a Gigabyte 4080 Super. I was gonna go with a newer GPU, but I felt like this one with the black and gray matched the motherboard perfectly. So I went with this 4080 Super that I was using about a year ago, that I basically just keep in my inventory for all of these builds that I do. Because if you guys don't know, a lot of the builds I do, I end up disassembling them within days after the content goes live, because I'm constantly reusing parts, and sometimes I can get components, sometimes I have to buy them myself. So a lot of the times I just disassemble them, put them back in the boxes for future builds, because I'm doing, 2 to 3 builds a week. So I constantly have to have an inventory of parts. So I went with this 4080 Super, which I think looks great. And then also, I don't know if I can get it on camera, but you can see this sag bracket is working perfectly, and you cannot see it. You can kind of see the top of it, but not even really. So one of the most discreet sag brackets on the market that I really like. Let me see if I can focus on that right there. So you can see the bottom of the bracket right there, and it's perfectly supporting the GPU, because I can tap on this and it is not moving at all. So really good sag bracket, highly recommend. I think it's like $25, so kind of expensive, I guess, but for how clean it looks great. And then you can see we have this really large gap. So if I were to run a standard sag bracket, we would have this really long pull right here, which I think would have not looked that good. So I ended up going with that sag bracket, highly recommend. And then what else do we have on the front right here? Obviously, we've got the Lian Li SL 140s going all the way around, and then we have a singular 120, and then we've got the Arctic 420 millimeter AIO, which I think looks great. And the tubes actually have like a perfect length, because sometimes you'll get AIOs that have that like weird bend in them, which I absolutely hate, but these are actually formed perfectly and fit really well within this case. So I think that looks great. But let's go ahead and take a look at the back. Make sure my power cable doesn't come out. So here is how the back looks with that plate kind of blocking all of our cable management, which looks good. But then if we open this up right here, we can see how the finished cable management turned out, and it actually ended up being pretty darn good. So I ended up tucking all of the cables that come from these hot swappable drive bays. I just tucked them into here. So you can see it looks really clean. Ideally, I'd probably like to remove both these entirely, but I ended up not doing that. So I just left them in, and then I tucked everything in. You can kind of see we've got some cables down here that I probably could clean up a bit more, but overall it is really, really clean. And then we just have the bulk of our cables right here, like 24 pins right here. Our EPS cables are coming up right here and then plugging into the top of the motherboard right there. Then here is our 600 watt GPU cable that's coming down, and then it's going through right here and then plugging into the GPU. So the cable management ended up turning out really nice, and honestly is pretty easy. This is a really big case, so I don't think anyone will have an issue with cable management with this case. I found it really easy. The only hard part is hiding all of these hot swappable drive cables, which at the end of the day actually looks pretty decent. And if you guys have seen my videos, you know I'm kind of a nut with this stuff. So not my favorite case to cable manage, but overall not bad at all. And I think it looks great. And then as far as the PSU, this is Lian Li's new, one of their new PSUs. This is the SX1200P, I believe it's called. And it's 1200 watts, looks really good. Matches the build really well. I thought about going with one of their Edge PSUs where the cables actually come out this way, but I thought this looked really clean and ended up going this route. And the included cables it comes with are extremely nice. Some of my favorite cables. Absolutely no need for extensions. I absolutely hate extensions. I mean, some of them look good, but they just add more cable mess. They add another failure point to the build. And I prefer just to use the stock PSU cables. So really nice PSU from Lian Li. So thank you again to Lian Li for sending this out as well. But guys, the build is done. And I didn't do any performance tests, but I did a very short OCCT test for the CPU and GPU. And the 9700X, I think, got up to around 78 degrees Celsius. And the GPU got up to around 68 degrees Celsius. So a very cool running build. We do have a bunch of 140 millimeter fans all the way around. So cooling is definitely not an issue with this build. But I think that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Let me know what you think of the build. Is there anything I should change with this build? Is there anything that you would have done different? And just let me know what kind of build you're running. What kind of case, what kind of specs are you running? I'd be really curious to see what everyone's running right now. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Share it with your friends. Comment everything I mentioned earlier as far as the build, as far as the fish tank style case, and basically anything else I mentioned. But once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope the video was enjoyable, and then I'll see y'all in the next video.